Chapter 11. The Mongol Siege. Rick led them back through the Mongol camp, which seemed deserted compared to the previous night. They raced between tents, dodging and weaving, trying to stay out of sight of the women and children and others who had stayed behind when the army had marched out. Rick listened for sounds of pursuit behind them, but heard none. When they reached the edge of the camp, he saw a cloud of dust and sand ahead of them, kicked up by the riding army, rising up into the air over Baghdad. "So, just for clarification," Sera said, "we're trying to find our way through that battlefield and somehow get back inside the city to figure out a new plan to save the House of Wisdom, right?" "Right," Dak said. "Easy," said Rick with a wry smile. "You were right about Tusi," Dak said to Sera. "He's not SQ." "I know," Sera said.
"Well, you don't have to be cocky about it,"
Dak said. "You didn't really know until I just told you." "No, I know because I asked him last night." "You did?" Dak asked. "Yes." "You found him?" Rick asked. "I did." Sera shook her head. "He hid me when the camp was being searched, and then he told me where to find you two, but he still won't help us save the library, which means he might as well be SQ, even if he isn't." "Well, that's that," Rick said. "We'll make a new plan with Abi." He started off across the desert sand. "The good news is that we're moving with the Mongol army, less likely to get trampled by their horses that way." "Thanks for that," Dak said. "But you should know the Mongols were famous for being able to shoot their bows in any direction while galloping on their horses, with deadly accuracy, even backward, which is where we'll be coming from." "Thanks for that," Sera said. "They'll be focused on the city," Rick said. At least that was what he hoped. They trudged across the miles of sand between the war camp and the city, getting steadily closer. Baghdad waited ahead, appearing helpless and small, while the Mongol army seemed to stretch from one edge of the horizon to the other, completely surrounding the city walls. The bulk of the army's movement and forces seemed to be concentrated straight ahead of them on a part of the wall with a massive tower. Rick didn't think the three of them would be able to get anywhere near the gates on this side of Baghdad. They'd have to circle around and use the river to get to the House of Wisdom. By the time they reached the Mongol army, the warriors had assumed their formations. The sights and smells presented a vivid reminder to Rick of the Viking army back in Paris, but the Mongols appeared much more disciplined and organized. The sound of their assault was deafening. The bulk of the cavalry hung back at the rear, while before them the Mongol siege engines had begun to pound the city. Catapults hurled huge rocks at Baghdad's walls, and giant crossbows fired burning bolts right over them. Rick could only imagine the fear and destruction that must be raging through the streets inside. It was obvious that the city couldn't last long under such an attack. In front of the siege engines, Mongol archers raced forward on horseback, galloped along the walls, firing arrow after arrow up at the city's soldiers, and then retreated behind the line. The bravery and skill of their maneuvers were pretty amazing. The three of them crept along behind all the action, unnoticed, or at least ignored. "We'll swing around to the other side of the city," Rick said. "Then we'll use a boat to make our way down the river to the wharf of the Needlemakers. Sound good?" "Sounds good," Sera said. "Lead on," Dak said. So they swung around behind the army, under the desert sun, as all along Baghdad's walls the Mongols maintained a constant barrage. It took quite some time for them to even see the river away to the northwest, but when they did, Rick had sudden doubts about his plan. Mongol forces lined the shore thickly enough that he worried they wouldn't be able to reach the river. "We'll just have to sneak past them onto a boat," Sera said. Rick turned to Dak. Here was a rare moment when his knowing something about history might actually be useful. "How long did the siege last?" he asked. 7 days, Dak said. "Then the Mongols took over that big tower we saw, called the Persian Tower. Then we have a little time. I think we should hide out and try to cross the river at night," Rick said. "We'll be more likely to sneak past them that way." So they hunkered down in a shallow wash and waited for night to fall. The sun passed overhead, and the hours ticked by. It didn't take long for Rick to feel the effects of not having any food or water. His lips and throat got dry. Hunger gnawed at his insides. The physical discomfort added to his fear and dread about what the future held for him. He'd been close to telling Dak about it back in Guokan's tent, but in the end, he couldn't bring himself to do it. It was like he was afraid to say it out loud, like that would make it more real somehow. He was also unsure of how to say it. For all the languages he knew, sometimes it was still hard to find the right words for some things. "Do you wonder what's going on in the future?" Dak asked. "What the world looks like with the breaks we've fixed?" Rick froze at the question. He noticed Sera did too. "Like the first break. I bet there's a lot of stuff named after Columbus now." Dak traced his finger in the sand, a zigzag, like he was connecting invisible dots. "I bet French history is pretty different since the SQ weren't able to stop the revolution. It's like nothing is settled. Everything is up in the air. Everything we're doing is making changes." "You seem a little bothered by that," Sera said. "Isn't that the point of what we're doing here?" "I guess," Dak said. "You guess?" Sera asked. "I mean, yes," Dak said. "Of course that's the point. It's just..." "Just what?" Rick asked. Dak frowned. "History is supposed to be settled." "It will be," Rick said. "When we're finished with the mission, it will be settled once and for all." They waited until the sun had gone down completely, and the sky was a deep black all the way across. The sounds of battle had faded in the darkness, but fires all along the front lines showed the Mongols were still there, waiting to resume their full assault with the dawn. By moonlight, Rick, Sera, and Dak scurried toward the river. They aimed for a dark, empty spot between two campfires, around which warriors sat and slept. Rick hoped that with the light in their eyes, the Mongols wouldn't be able to see too far into the shadows. The time travelers slipped down to the river's edge in single file, where the moon glistened over the inky water, and the sound of it lapping the shore hid some of the sounds they made. A cluster of small boats rocked gently with the current, bumping into one another, and against a small dock to which they were tied. The three of them waded into the river toward them, the water chilly against Rick's skin. Dak went to the ropes, securing the boats, while Sera climbed into one and kept herself low. "I'm going to let them all loose," Dak whispered. "That way, they won't have a boat nearby to follow us, and they won't know which one we're in." "Good idea," Rick whispered back. Apparently, the kid did have them on occasion. Once the ships were floating free, Dak gave them each a push out into the river, where the current grabbed them and pulled them away. Rick held on to Sera's boat, and once Dak had climbed into it, Rick heaved it out into the river and scrambled on board after them. "Well," Sera said, "that went well." A cry of alarm sounded on the bank. Rick turned back to see shadows racing from the campfires down to the shoreline. "Do you think they can see us?" Dak asked. Something hissed and splashed in the water near the ship. An arrow. "I'd say so," Rick said. "Quick, grab the oars." They swung the paddles out over the water and plowed ahead as fast as they could. More arrows flew at them, striking the water, a couple of them even hitting the hull of the ship. "We got lucky," Dak said. "I don't think they can see us very well." "They can see well enough," Rick said. They paddled ferociously until their boat was out of range of the archers, but Rick didn't feel like they could let up. They had to reach the wharf of the Needlemakers quickly in case the Mongols decided to round up some other boats and come after them. They moved down the river, and before long, the buildings of Baghdad stood to either side. The city lights reflected toward them in wavering strips along the river. The Caliph's palace soon came into view, and Rick steered the craft toward the shoreline near it. They came up to the wharf of the Needlemakers, and above it Rick saw the House of Wisdom. He relaxed a bit and breathed a sigh of relief, a little amazed they had made it back into the city from the Mongol war camp. They pulled up alongside the pier, and Dak jumped out. He tied the boat off and then helped Sera up. Rick followed after him, but before he'd quite gained his footing, someone shouted, "Halt!" Rick turned as half a dozen of the city guards approached them, swords drawn. "Spies!" one of the guards shouted. Rick held up his hands. "We're not spies. We're visiting scholars at the House of Wisdom. We're your allies." The guards surrounded them, still brandishing their weapons. "What proof do you have?" one of the guards asked. "Seriously?" Dak said. "Just go get Abi, and he'll tell you." "You're friends of the traitor Abi?" the guard asked. "Then I have a better idea. We'll take you to the Grand Vizier and let him decide what to do with you." "Traitor?" Dak asked. "Great," Sera said. "Take us to the Vizier." Rick opened his eyes wide and stared at her. "No, not great." "Why?" Sera asked. "The Vizier knows who we are. He can vouch for us." "No," Dak said. "You don't get it. Hulagu's General Guo Khan is a time warden, and he told us about his spies in the city. The Vizier is SQ. Chapter 12. Imprisoned. The guards marched Sera, Dak, and Rick up from the river toward the palace. Knowing the SQ had agents both outside and inside the city made the situation seem that much more hopeless. But Sera refused to give up. She couldn't. They had to fix the break no matter what. "At least we know why the Vizier gave the Caliph such bad advice," Dak said. "He was working from the inside to make sure Baghdad gets destroyed." "Yes," Rick said. "And that makes me feel so much better about being his prisoner." They entered a smaller building near the palace. It had thick walls and very narrow windows. The guards pushed the three of them ahead, down a hallway, into one of several cells. Metal squealed as the guards swung the iron bars shut on them and locked the door, then left without another word. "So this isn't good," Sera said. "Historians?" The voice came from across the hallway, in the cell opposite theirs. Abi stepped forward from the shadows. "Is that you?" "Yes." Sera felt relieved to see him again, even here. "Are you all right, Abi?" "I am unharmed," he said. "They arrested me shortly after I helped you get out of the city. Were you able to convince Hulagu to spare the libraries?" "We never even saw him," Dak said. "Rick and I got caught by General Guo Khan, who's a time warden, by the way. Sera tried one more time to convince Tusi, but he wouldn't listen to her." Abi hung his head, and the broad smile he normally wore fell from his face. "Then it seems we have lost hope." "Please don't say that." Sera had to fight pretty desperately within herself to keep from feeling the same way. There had to be another option, something they hadn't thought of. If she still had her long hair, she'd be pulling it clean out right now, as she studied the bars in their cell for a way to escape. "It's okay," Rick said. "We'll think of something." "Right," Dak said. "This isn't the first cell we've been locked in." Sera took a deep breath. Then she grabbed hold of the bars and tested them one by one to see if any of them were loose. They weren't. She went to the narrow window and peered outside. Their cell wasn't up high, so there wasn't a fall to worry about on the other side. The window was just too small, but the mud bricks were soft enough that they might be able to chip away at them if they had some kind of tool. "Do any of you have anything on you?" she asked. All the three of them had with them were the infinity ring and the square. But from deep within his robes, Abi pulled out a small knife. "They missed this when they arrested me," he said. "I keep it on me for sharpening quills. It's useless for anything more than that." "Maybe not," Sera said. "Can you toss it over?" Abi approached his bars and stuck his arm through them. "Watch out! Here it comes!" He lobbed the knife gently into the air, and it sailed toward them. But it clanged against their cell door and bounced back into the middle of the hallway. Sera rushed up to the door with Dak and Rick. Abi's arm still hung through his own cell's bars. They all stared at the knife on the ground between them. "I'm a scholar, not an athlete," Abi said. "I never could throw well." Rick dropped to the ground. My arms are the longest. He reached through the bars, along the ground, straining to reach the knife. The tip of his middle finger almost touched it, but not quite. He grunted and pushed, but couldn't get close enough. Finally, he stood, dusting himself off. I can't. Sera looked around again, this time with an eye toward anything that might help them reach the blade. They had nothing. She glanced across the hallway at Abi, who looked completely defeated, resting his turbaned head against the bars. His turban. Abi, she said. How long is your turban? Abi lifted his head. Several cubits. Why? If we stretch it between us and then drag it along the floor, we might be able to snag the knife and pull it closer. Abi seemed reluctant at first, but eventually sighed, closed his eyes, and reached up to his turban. He began uncoiling it from his head, a process that took some time and showed how intricate the headpiece was in the first place. Beneath the turban, his dark hair was long, and he wore it braided. I'll try to do better this time. He held one end of the fabric in one hand and bunched up the rest of it in the other. He tossed the bunched end toward Sera, and it unraveled through the air toward her, landing safely within reach. They lowered it to the ground, pulled it tight between their selves, and held it against the ground over the knife. Then Sera pulled it toward her. The knife didn't move, so she let Abi pull some fabric back, and they tried it again. And again. Finally, the tip of the knife caught in the weave of the fabric, and as Sera pulled, it pivoted the knife to a standing position, the blade pointing up. She pulled some more, and the knife came down. I can reach that now, Rick said. He dropped to the ground as Abi pulled his turban back and began rewrapping it around his head. Then, the sound of a door opening came from down the hallway. Hurry, Dak whispered. Someone's coming. Rick reached through the bars, the knife just barely within reach of his fingertips. He swiped at the blade. Careful, Abi said. It's sharp. I know, Rick said, grunting. Sera heard footsteps just around the corner. Rick, she whispered. Got it. He whipped his arm back into the cell, the knife in his hand, just as two guards came into view. The Grand Vizier wobbled between them.
So, you three, he cleared his throat, scholars have come back to join the traitor.
I am no traitor, Abi said. It is you who have promoted a disastrous course of action with the Caliph for your own gain. It's more than that, Dak said. He's SQ. Abi blinked. What? Yeah, Rick said. Sera noted he had already hidden the knife out of view. So is the market inspector. They're working for Hulagu's general, Guo Khan. I see. Abi's normally soft expression had become suddenly hard and angry. The Grand Vizier sneered.
You see nothing. For all the books in your house of wisdom, you are not very wise.
He turned towards Sera, Dak, and Rick.
And now, give me the device.
Sera folded her arms. The Vizier raised his voice.
Do not make it necessary for me to kill any of you. Hand over the device.
Sera looked at Dak and Rick. She looked at Abi. And she couldn't imagine letting anything happen to any of them when she could do something to prevent it. She reached into her coat and pulled out the infinity ring. The Vizier held out his hand.
Give it to me.
Sera clenched her jaw. She slowly passed the ring between the bars. The Vizier took hold of the other end, and for a moment they played a silent game of tug-of-war before Sera allowed her fingers to relax and let it go. The Vizier tucked the ring inside his robes.
You will remain locked in here until the House of Wisdom falls. After that, you will be released, and it matters not what you do.
It wouldn't matter because they would be stranded in the ancient Middle East. Sera wondered if she'd made a mistake handing the ring over so easily, but she also knew there wasn't much else she could have done. She'd bought them some time at least. The Vizier turned with his guards and marched away. No one said anything. They all seemed to be listening to the fading sounds of footsteps. When it was silent, Dak threw up his hands.
Well, that's just great.
"It'll be fine," Sera said. "We'll just have to find a way to get the ring back after we save the House of Wisdom."
Which we still don't know how to do, Rick said.
"Well, the first step is to get out of this cell," Sera said. "You have the knife?"
Yeah.
Rick pulled it out.
What are you thinking?
Sera pointed at the window. "We chip away at the bricks until we can break a few of them free and we climb out."
What about Abi?
Dak whispered. "He can't escape through our window. We can't just leave him." Sera hadn't thought about that. "What about picking the lock?" Dak asked.
Right, Rick said. Have you ever picked an ancient Baghdad lock before?
"No," Dak said. "But how complicated can it be?" "Quite complicated," Abi said from his cell. "But not impossible." "Do you know how?" Dak asked. "I know how the mechanism works," Abi said. "But we'll need more than a knife. We also need a pick of some kind." Sera had already taken inventory of what they had available in the cell. There was only one thing left, and it made her feel queasy to think about it. She reached into her coat and pulled out the square. The vizier didn't know to ask for it, so she'd managed to hang on to it. She spoke hesitantly. "I could probably take this apart and make something to use."
The square?
Rick's eyes grew wide. He seemed afraid of something. Dak nodded.
Why not? We were going to have to go to the future to get a new one anyway.
"And I'll try to put it back together when I'm done." Sera wasn't sure why Rick looked so frightened. "It'll be okay." Rick took several deep breaths.
Okay, do it. The mission is what counts.
Sera sat down with the square in her lap. There was a seam between the screen and the metal body. She took the blade of the knife and teased it into the seam, then slipped the knife around the entire edge of the square, breaking the seal. Then she popped the screen off, splitting the square open like a clam's shell. Dust and debris filled the cracks and hollows inside the device, covering some of the circuitry and the battery. All their adventures until now had apparently been taking their toll, and Sera felt guilty for having neglected the device. The particles that had found their way into the square had come from 8 different times in history, and almost as many locations from all around the world. It really needed to be cleaned anyway. Sera inhaled and tried her best to blow the dust away. "I can't believe I let it go this long. I clean the inside of my phone more often than this."
You clean the inside of your phone? Rick asked. Are you kidding? Dak said. She cleans the inside of her calculator.
Sera felt her face flushing. "So? What about it?"
Nothing.
Rick was hiding a smile. Sera could tell. "For the love of mincemeat," Sera said. "I can't help it if I'm the only one who knows about the proper care of electronics. Dust is death, you know." She blew on the square again. "And I can't believe this thing is still going."
It was made to last the whole mission, Rick said.
"Not the whole mission," Dak said. "Can we use anything in there?" Sera scanned the components. Most of it was pretty much what she expected. There were a few surprises in the placement of things, but overall it was a pretty well-made device. She immediately saw some metal brackets that she could pull out. Even if she couldn't get them back in afterward, the square would work without them, as long as it didn't get bumped around too badly. "Yes," she said. "I think we're in business." Chapter 13. Silk and Locks. Dak winced a little as Sera ripped some thin pieces of metal from the square, but Rick looked like he felt actual physical pain at seeing the device gutted. Sera pressed the 2 halves back together and slipped them back into her coat. She held out the metal strips. "Who wants to try?" Dak laced his fingers and cracked his knuckles.
"I'll give it a shot."
Sera handed him the knife and the metal pieces. He walked to the door. Abi stood across the way, nodding. "All right," the historian said. "There are pins inside you must lift with those picks, and then turn the lock with the knife." Dak knelt down. "Okay." He took the metal pick in one hand and the knife in the other. "You sure you don't want to take a crack at yours first?" "Your fingers are far more nimble than mine. Start by exploring with those picks. Listen to the sounds inside the lock. Feel what's going on inside it." Dak reached his arm around through the bars and slipped the pick inside the keyhole. He poked around, exploring, forming an image in his mind of what the inside of the lock looked like. He thought he could tell where the pins were. He experimented with pushing on them, figuring out how they moved, and when he thought he was ready, he stuck the tip of the knife in the lock and tried to lift the pins and turn the lock at the same time. It was not easy. In fact, it was hard, really hard. His impatience and frustration got the better of him. The pieces were just so tiny, and he couldn't get them to work right. He jumped to his feet with a growl. "Someone else take a turn." "You're doing well," Sera said. "You were figuring it out. Keep trying." Dak frowned. Maybe they should try chipping away at the window like Sera had suggested after all. Dak walked over to it and looked outside. He noticed that during his lock-picking attempts, the sun had started to rise. The pink dawn light and the blue shadows it cast fell on the clay walls and buildings around them. Within moments, Dak heard what sounded like thunder, but he recognized the noise for what it was. "The Mongols have started up their siege again," he said. "Day 2. 5 more to go." "Then what happens?" Rick asked. "Well?" Dak resisted the urge to point out how useful historical facts could be. He'd been resisting saying a lot of things like that the past few days. He was trying hard to be nice, even though it was really starting to bother him that he didn't know what was going on with Sera and Rick. After that, Halago moved into the city. He set up his own temporary palace. 5 days after that, the Caliph surrendered, and the Mongols went through the city destroying everything. "So we better get this door open," Sera said. Dak sighed. Some of the frustration he'd been feeling had faded a bit. "Okay, I'll keep trying." He went back to the lock and was about to kneel down when the sounds of footsteps approached again from down the hallway. "They're coming back!" Dak backed away from the door and shoved the knife and pick inside his coat. 2 guards came into view, holding some clay bowls. They unlocked the door to Dak, Sera, and Rick's cell and opened it just wide enough to push the bowls inside, along with a pitcher of water. They did the same with Abi's cell. "Food," one of the guards said, even though that was obvious. They relocked the doors and left. One bowl had some kind of beans in it. They were mushy and tasteless. The other bowl had some kind of oatmeal or something. There weren't any utensils, so they just took turns eating with their dirty fingers. It was pretty gross, but Dak was hungry enough that he didn't care. After he'd finished eating, he went back to the lock, but still couldn't get it. He passed the knife and pick off to Rick. "You try. I can't." But Rick couldn't either, and neither could Sera. After a full day of trying, Dak realized that even if Abi said it was not impossible to pick the lock, that didn't mean it was likely. "I think we need to go back to busting out the window," Dak said. "But it'll take a while, and I don't know how we'll do it with the guards dropping in on us." "We need to wait and see when they come back," Rick said. "Once we figure out their pattern, we'll know when we stand the best chance." "That still doesn't solve the problem of leaving Abi behind," Sera said. "Oh, right." Dak turned to look at the scholar. Abi shook his head. "Young historians, you must fix the break. Do not worry about me." That didn't sit well with Dak. But right now, they didn't seem to have any other options, so they settled in to wait for the guards to return. While they waited, Sera tried to put the pieces back into the square, but all the lock-picking attempts had apparently taken their toll. "I can't get them back in," Sera said. "So what does that mean?" Rick's voice had an edge of panic. "Maybe nothing," Sera said. "They were just brackets holding things in place. It will still work. For a while." "For a while?" Rick asked. "Probably for as long as we need it to," Sera said. "Things are just a little loose inside." Dak watched Rick's reaction and started trying to put things together. The guy was really worried about the square breaking, but Dak didn't get that because they had to go back to get a new one anyway. But now that Dak thought about it, he realized Rick had been acting weird ever since he'd gotten that message from Brent and Mari. Was Rick worried about going back to the present? Why? The only thing Dak could come up with was that it had something to do with his remnants. Remnants. It had all started with Aristotle's remnants, and it always seemed to come back to remnants. Even though Dak wished he knew what they were like for Sera, he was mostly grateful he didn't have remnants. They didn't seem to bring anyone anything but pain and fear. But having actual parents missing in time was worse. Dak hadn't yet seen a sign of his parents in this era. He'd been trying really hard not to think about it, but he couldn't help wonder if that meant something. Maybe Dak, Sera, and Rick had fixed enough breaks that his parents had gone home. Would they be there in the future when he went back for a new square? His heart started beating faster at that thought. It filled him with hope, even as the sounds of battle raged on outside. The guards came back that evening with a second meal that consisted of the same stuff as the first meal. They dropped off the food and water, took away the empty bowls from earlier, and left. "I don't think they'll be back until morning," Rick said. "Now is probably our best chance if we're going to try and chip our way out of here." He took out the knife and went over to the window. Dak watched as Rick ran the blade along the edges of the mud bricks and scraped at their seams. He tried to drive the knife in between them, putting all his weight behind it. "They're harder than they look," he said. "This is going to take a long time. Too long." But he went back to it, and soon he'd worked up a sweat, even though the sun had set and the room was getting colder as it got darker. The third day of siege had come to an end. They were running out of time. Dak's thoughts went to the unstoppable Mongol army, and facts started bubbling in his head. Normally, each fact just kind of popped and went away, replaced by the next. But right now, one of them was staying around. The Mongols did something cool with their armor. They wore silk underneath it, against their skin. When an arrow pierced their armor, the arrowhead got caught in the silk, and even if it then pierced the warrior's skin, the silk made the arrow easy to pull out and kept the injury cleaner and less deadly. Dak kept thinking and thinking about this fact. There was something about it that seemed to apply to this situation. He turned his attention from Rick's attempts to chisel at the window and looked around the cell. He looked at the door, the lock where he'd spent several frustrated hours. The lock. That was it! Dak almost wanted to jump. "Abi!" Sera and Rick startled in surprise at his outburst. "Yes?" Abi said. "Can I cut off a piece of silk from your turban?" Dak asked. I suppose if it is absolutely necessary." Abi started unwinding it from his head again. "What do you plan to do?" "You'll see," Dak said. A few moments later, Abi tossed one end of the thin fabric across the hallway, and Dak used a knife to slice off a couple of inches. Abi pulled the rest back, while Dak took the metal pick that Sera hadn't been able to put back in the square. He went to the door, reached around, and laid the piece of silk from Abi's turban over the keyhole. Then he took the pick and gently packed the silk into the lock. He remembered the way the inside looked in his head, and he packed the silk all around the pins. "What are you doing?" Sera asked. "The silk is quiet," Dak said, "and slippery. When the guards go to use their key, I think the silk will give enough to let the door unlock, but then it'll jam up the pins and keep it from locking again when they close the door. We'll be able to walk right out of here." Don't you think the guards will notice the door not staying shut?" Rick asked. "Not if we do something to keep them from noticing," Dak said. "And I've got an idea for that, too." Dak explained it to them, and they were both quiet. So was Abi. "Dak," Sera finally said. Yes? I think this might be one of your good ideas. Dax smiled, with a bit of pride. Let's hope it works. The rest of that night, they rehearsed what they would do when the guards came. Rick tossed the knife and pick to Abi, managing to land them both right through the bars, and Abi cut some silk and did the same thing with the lock on his door. The sun came up, and everyone waited without saying much. Then, sometime mid-morning, Dak heard the guards coming. He nodded to Rick and Sera. They nodded back. Moments later, the guards came into view with the same bowls of nasty food. One of them pulled out his key and stuck it into the lock. Dak's heartbeat quickened. He held his breath. The guard tried to turn the key, stopped, and looked down at the lock. Was it going to work? The guard turned harder, and the lock clicked. He pulled the key out and opened the door the same foot or so they always did to slide the bowls of food in and out. Dak readied himself and hoped Rick was doing the same. Then, right as the guard went to close the door, Dak launched himself at it. Chapter 14. Jailbreak. No! Dak screamed. Let me out! You can't keep me here! Rick rushed the door too, ready to play his part. The guard reacted to Dak's charge by slamming the door shut hard, just as Dak crashed against it. Dak and Rick grabbed the bars at the same time, and while Dak made a show of tugging hard on them, Rick used his strength to keep the door from opening, assuming the door would open. The guards stepped away from Dak's thrashing at the door. Back off! One of them shouted. Dak stopped pulling and glared at them. Back off! The guard said again. Dak stepped away from the door. You want to eat? The guard said. You won't ever try anything like that again. Understand? I understand, Dak said. The guards turned to Abi. They unlocked his cell, and as they went to close it again, he performed a variation of what Dak had done, though not quite as extreme. The guards did not look pleased. You too, traitor? One of them said. Just for that, no food for any of you tonight. This is all you get until tomorrow. You can't do that, Sera shouted. No? The guard looked at her. I guess you'll find out when you go to sleep hungry tonight. Sera let out a little whimper that Rick would have believed completely if he didn't know her better. Sera just wasn't the whimpering type. The guards gave them all one last glare and stalked away. Everyone waited until they were long gone, the hallways completely silent, before they approached the door. Moment of truth, Rick said. He had to admit, if this worked, it would be one of Dak's finest moments. So he decided to let the kid have it. Why don't you try the door? Dak took a deep breath and stepped forward. He grabbed the bars and gave a gentle tug. Nothing happened. Dak closed his eyes and pulled again, harder, and the door popped open. Rick stared at it, not quite sure he could believe what he was seeing. You did it! Sera actually giggled. Dak smirked in that cocky way that Rick had found so annoying from day one. Of course I did. That changed Rick's mind about the compliment he had been about to give. He turned to Abi. Did it work for your door? Abi pulled on the bars, and his door also popped open. Yes, the historian said with a smile. The four of them left their cells and looked down the hallway. Rick had no idea where the guards were, but he was pretty sure he remembered how to get from their cells back to the front door. Follow me, he said, quietly. He led them down the hallway and around a couple of turns, each time listening carefully before peering around the corner. The place was deserted. The guards weren't anywhere to be seen. Looks like nobody comes here, Rick said. I bet the vizier picked this place so we wouldn't be discovered. The guards don't even seem to stick around except to bring us our food. I hope they left the front door open, Dak said. It turned out that they had. The front door didn't even lock. Okay, Rick said. Before we go out there, what's the plan? In 3 days, Hulagu will be inside the city walls, Dak said. I say we try to meet him there and do what we were going to do in the war camp. What we've been trying to do from the beginning. We convince him to spare the House of Wisdom. What about the Infinity Ring? Sera asked. Rick considered what to do. Gwo-Khan had said the Vizier worked for him. That meant the Vizier was probably going to turn the ring over to the General the first chance he got. Once the General got a hold of it, Rick was pretty sure the ring would disappear for good. So they had to get it back before Hulagu and Gwo-Khan entered the city. I think we need to split up, Rick said. 2 of us try to get to Hulagu, while the other 2 go after the ring. We meet back at the House of Wisdom. Okay, Dak said. Who goes where? I'll go after the ring, Rick said. He felt like he had to be the one to do it, to prove to himself that he was still committed to the mission, in spite of the potential cost. It will be in the palace with the Vizier, Abi said. I know my way around, so I will go with you. That means Dak and I will get into position so that we'll be able to reach Hulagu, Sera said. Right. We can totally do this. Rick grasped the handle on the door. Ready? Everyone nodded at him. He opened the door and peered outside. There wasn't anyone around. Coast is clear, he said. Good luck, everyone. He opened the door wider and stepped out into the sunlight. The sounds of the Mongol assault much louder now than they had been in their cell. The crash and boom of the artillery echoed across the city. So did the battle shrieks of their warriors. Rick and Abi turned toward the palace, while Dak and Sera turned the other direction to head into the city. Rick glanced back at them as they set off, heading toward the danger and destruction. Just outside the palace, Abi stopped. I do not know what we will face inside. The Caliph may still deny the danger, or he may have surrounded himself with his guards. There's only one way to find out, Rick said. Together, they entered the garden they had seen on their first trip to the palace. The beauty and tranquility of the place felt really weird now when Rick thought about the destruction taking place not too far away. It was like the Caliph lived in his own little bubble. He could look at his flowers and pretend that everything was okay. After that, they passed into the menagerie, but something wasn't quite right. Many of the animals were gone, or at least not in their cages, and some of the cages were open. It looks as though the animal keepers have fled, Abi whispered. So where are the animals? Rick asked. Probably wherever they would feel safer than in a cage. Abi looked around them, at the trees, at the bushes, the tall grass. Rick imagined eyes peering at him from all directions and felt a tingling sensation crawl up his neck. He shook his head. He had to be imagining it. And yet... They proceeded slowly, eyes on the vegetation. There had been tigers in here, lions. As they reached the far side of the menagerie, they heard a blowing sound ahead of them. Something shook the bushes. Rick and Abi stopped in the path, and both held perfectly still as a black bear lumbered into view. It looked at them, lifting its nose into the air, nostrils flaring. Then its ears went back flat against its head, and the blowing sound it made got louder. Its teeth clacked together as it swung its head low, back and forth. What do we do? Rick whispered, without taking his eyes off it. I don't know, Abi said. It is blocking our exit. Rick let his gaze leave the bear a moment to look for another way out. He noticed a second-story balcony running the length of one of the menagerie's walls. If they could somehow get up there, they could escape. Rick looked closer and noticed a tree growing up against the wall that appeared to come within reach of the balcony. Abi, he whispered, what if we climb that tree? Abi's eyes widened. I have never in my life climbed a tree. There's a first time for everything, Rick said. I think I remember somewhere that you're not supposed to turn your back on a bear. Rather like the Caliph, Abi said, managing a smile. Right. So let's back away from the caliph's bear toward that tree."
"Lead the way,"
Abi said. Rick slid one foot backward, then the other, inching away from the bear. Abi followed. The bear watched them without moving, still blowing and clacking. As the distance grew between the animal and them, Rick took larger and larger steps, gaining confidence. But that feeling was short-lived as the bear decided to lope toward them a few paces.
"Stay calm,"
Abi said.
"It is not charging us."
"Don't make eye contact." That was something else Rick remembered from somewhere, probably a nature show he'd watched with his grandma. They perceive it as a challenge.
"Also like the caliph,"
Abi said, but without the smile. A few steps later, Rick reached the tree. He didn't know what kind it was, but it had branches low enough to reach, and that was all that mattered. "Abi," he said, "you go up first."
"No,"
he said. "You go.
I may need you to pull me up."
Rick hesitated, but decided that if this was Abi's first time climbing a tree, it would be easier to pull him than push him. He reached up to the nearest branch, still facing the bear as fully as he could. The bark felt smooth in his hands.
"Here I go."
In one smooth motion, Rick turned, kicked against the trunk, and pulled himself up onto the branch. He swung one of his legs over it and sat upright, feet dangling to either side. Then he lifted his knees one at a time and got his feet under him. He braced himself against the trunk. "Okay, Abi, I can help you now." Abi darted a look up at him. Then the historian stretched his hands toward the branch, only barely managing to reach it. Through the leaves, Rick watched the bear getting closer, ears still back, head still swinging. "Use the trunk like I did," Rick said. Abi adjusted his grip on the branch and then kicked at the trunk, but his shoes just scraped it, and he ended up doing a little bicycle pedal in the air, hanging from the branch. The bear circled around the tree, watching him. "Try again," Rick said. "Kick higher." Abi made another leap, and this time it worked. He managed to get his chest up onto the branch, his elbows hanging over it, the rest of him dangling. His face was red, his cheeks puffing with his heavy breathing. Rick bent down and grabbed his robes. "Don't let go. Try to lift your leg up so I can grab it." Abi grunted and swung his leg. Rick bent down and snatched for it, but couldn't reach it. "Higher," he said. The bear came closer. "Higher, Abi." The historian let out a low rumble that turned to a growl, then a roar as he closed his eyes and heaved his leg up. Rick managed to snag Abi's pants, and after that it was easy enough to pull his leg up over the branch and help him stand up. They both looked down at the bear. It circled around the base of the tree, sniffing, and then it stood up on its hind legs, front claws raking the trunk. "Oh," Rick said with a sinking feeling. "That's right. Bears climb trees." Chapter 15. The Grand Vizier. Rick perched on the branch, which was now bouncing and creaking under his and Abi's combined weight. The black bear below them had dug its claws into the bark of the tree and had started climbing after them.
"You all right?"
Abi said.
"They do climb trees."
"Let's go." Rick reached for the next branch and climbed higher. It was easier now because they could use the other branches like steps on a ladder. Abi was able to keep up on his own, but he was already out of breath. The bear, on the other hand, did not seem to be slowing down at all. Rick made it to the branch closest to the balcony's wooden railing. He reached out with one of his hands while holding onto the tree with the other and grabbed it. Then he pushed off of the tree and pulled himself across the space between them, his toes landing right on the ledge. After that, it was easy to climb over the railing. He just didn't know if it would be easy for Abi. He turned back to the historian and reached out his hand. "Hurry! The bear is—"
"Thank you."
Abi's knuckles were white as he inched along the branch toward Rick.
"But I am trying very hard not to think about what the bear is doing or wants to do."
"Right," Rick said. "Sorry." But the bear was getting really close, and those claws looked long and mean.
"All right,"
Abi said.
"I think I am ready."
"I'm here." Rick reached out farther. Abi stretched and grasped Rick's hand like they were about to arm wrestle. It was a bit sweaty, and Rick hoped he could hold on. "On your count," Rick said. The bear was only one branch below Abi now. Abi nodded and exhaled. "All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Abi jumped toward the balcony. Rick yanked on his arm, and the historian crossed the gap, landing on the ledge. But a second later, his toes slipped. "Abi!" Rick still held onto him, and it felt like something tore in his shoulder as the historian's weight almost pulled him over the railing. Rick cried out as searing pain shot up and down his arm, but he refused to let go. He would not let go. "Come on," Rick spoke through gritted teeth. "You gotta help me here." The historian dangled as the bear reached the tree branch where they had just been. It beat the branch with its paw, sending little chips of wood flying. Could it make the jump? Rick's grip began to fail. "Abi, come on, man." "I am trying," the historian said. "I just need to grab the railing." Rick braced himself for the pain, propped one foot against the railing, and pushed backward, lifting Abi a little bit higher. The pain in his shoulder got so bad, he worried he might black out. "There!" Abi got his other hand onto the railing. With Rick still pulling, he heaved himself over the railing, bent at the waist. From there, he simply tumbled onto the balcony, and Rick went down with him. He fell onto his back and lay there for a moment. The pain had eased up in his shoulder a bit, but it flared again as soon as he tried to move it. "The bear does not seem inclined to make the jump," Abi said. Rick looked up, grimacing. The historian was right. The bear had stayed where it was, just watching them. They'd escaped. He dropped his head back down. "You are injured," Abi said. "My shoulder," Rick said. "May I?" Abi knelt down beside him and gently felt Rick's entire side, his arm, and then his shoulder. Rick winced. "It is dislocated," Abi said. "But I can put it back." "Do it," Rick said. "It will hurt," Abi said. "But then it will feel better." Rick lifted up his good arm and bit down hard on the sleeve of his coat. He closed his eyes, and he nodded. Abi took Rick's arm in a very firm grip, and then knelt on Rick's shoulder. The pain burst white-hot, blinding. Rick felt like his whole side was twisting up in a spasm. Then he felt a popping, and then the pain was gone. Abi released him. "There," he said. Rick's voice came out a croak. "Thank you." "No," Abi said. "Thank you. You didn't let me go." Rick sat up, blinking, testing his shoulder. It was still incredibly tender, but he no longer felt the same stabbing pain. He staggered to his feet. "Right," he said. "Now let's go find the vizier." Abi led them from room to room, each time scouting a bit ahead for any sign of the palace guards. So far, they hadn't seen anyone else. The place seemed deserted. "I don't get it," Rick said. "Where is everybody?" "I don't know," Abi said. "But the vizier will be with the caliph. The SQ is too close to victory to let him out of their sight now. They won't risk anything going wrong." "So where is the caliph?" Rick asked. Abi smiled, as if a realization had dawned on him. "Like the bear, he will go where he feels safe. Follow me." The historian moved forward without any hesitation, and Rick fell in step with him. They took a few turns and ended up in a familiar place, just a room away from the garden where they had met the caliph the first time. "Are you serious?" Rick said. "He's here? When the Mongols are about to take the city?" Abi nodded. "He'll have everyone in there with him, his family, his guards, but like the bear, he feels threatened and may charge." "So how do we get to the vizier?" Abi's wide smile returned. "We get the vizier to come to us. Just follow my lead." He lifted his head high and strode ahead. Rick did the same, and they entered the garden. It looked just as it had days earlier, except more armed guards blocked their way. Lots more. They formed a wall around the caliph's tent in the middle of the garden. As Rick stood there, a frightened-looking servant dashed up and spritzed them with that same rose water from before. Rick couldn't believe it. This whole thing seemed insane.
"What is the meaning of—"
The vizier trundled toward them from inside the ring of guards, but stopped short when he saw them.
"How did—"
"The SQ is not the only organization with spies and allies," Abi said. "Our forces are here too, some even in this very garden." The vizier's mouth opened, and he glanced over both shoulders. "I just wanted to give you fair warning," Abi said. "We're coming for you." Abi turned around and walked away. Rick watched the vizier's reaction turn from fear to anger. The SQ agent actually began to tremble. "Come," Abi called to Rick, and Rick followed after the historian. "Walk calmly," Abi whispered. "But be ready to run. In a moment, the vizier will recover from the surprise." A moment later, they heard the vizier shout behind them,
"Seize those two!"
"Now we run," Abi said. They sprinted forward, racing through the palace. Rick got completely disoriented, but Abi seemed to know exactly where he was going, so Rick just stuck closely to him. A backward glance revealed 4 guards and the vizier charging after them. "Do you have a plan?" Rick asked, panting hard. "I am making one," Abi said. "For now, keep running." Rick decided he better start thinking about a plan of his own. There was no way they could handle 4 guards and the vizier, just the 2 of them. They rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. It was a dead end. Abi frowned at the wall as if it were simply a fact he disagreed with. "This should not be here." "It's here," Rick said. "Let's go." They ran back, retracing their footsteps, and entered into a long, narrow room, coming face to face with the vizier and his guards. "If you have so many behind you," the vizier wheezed as he spoke, "then why do you run?" He turned to the guards. "Take them!" But just then, something growled behind the guards, low and menacing. They all turned to look at the same time, and between them, Rick saw a tiger. It was huge, twice as big as the bear had been. Its whole face lifted in a snarl, exposing its fangs, and it held its body low to the ground, stalking forward, ready to pounce. "Run!" one of the guards shouted, and the 4 of them flew right past Rick and Abi, almost knocking them down. The vizier stood paralyzed. The tiger roared, sounding as loud to Rick as an entire Mongol army. "We should run too," Abi said, and Rick agreed. They shot down a different hallway than the guards had gone and heard the vizier behind them. "Wait for me!" A few yards ahead, they came to a staircase. Rick took it 4 steps at a time, and they came up onto another balcony. This one was narrow, with no railing, and overlooked a small courtyard. The frightened screams of the vizier and the roaring of the tiger echoed behind them. Rick looked around and noticed a tapestry hanging from the wall. It gave him an idea, and he ripped it down. "Take the other end," he said to Abi. Together, they stretched it across the door. Rick heard footsteps on the stairs. "When they hit it, you let go," Rick said. Abi shifted on his feet and nodded. Rick was pretty sure this was going to hurt his shoulder like nothing else. The vizier's footsteps and screaming reached the top of the staircase, and the tapestry exploded outward. Abi let go of his end, and the vizier careened forward, arms pinwheeling, to the very edge of the balcony. The tiger leapt out of the stairwell right behind him, seemed to notice the ledge, and slipped on its feet. But the momentum of its weight carried it along the floor. It scrambled, paws and claws splayed, but went over the side with a roar. The vizier, still teetering, grabbed the tapestry as he fell, and Rick cried out at the pain in his shoulder. But it wasn't as bad as before. It wasn't dislocated. The vizier clung to the tapestry as the beast, which had apparently landed just fine, paced around the courtyard below. "I'm telling you right now," Rick shouted down to the vizier. "I've been lifting Abi all day, and I can't hold you forever." "Please," the vizier shouted. "Don't drop me." "Where is the device you took from us?" Rick asked. "I have it. It is here." "Hand it up," Rick said.
"Are you mad?"
The vizier's voice completely broke.
"I would have to let go."
"Only with one hand," Rick said. The vizier let out a pathetic sob.
"I can't."
The muscles in Rick's arms started to quiver. He had been telling the truth. He couldn't hold on much longer. But he wasn't really planning to feed the guy to the tiger either. He just hoped the vizier would give in before Rick had to pull him up. The tiger roared again below them, eyeing the vizier's dangling feet. The animal actually made a leap for him, but missed, and the vizier screamed. "He might jump higher next time," Rick shouted.
"All right!"
the vizier shrieked. He let go of the tapestry with one hand, hanging by the other, reached into his robes, and pulled out the ring. Rick nodded to Abi, and the historian came forward, reached down, and took the ring from the vizier's hand. As soon as the vizier had let go of the device, he clamped both hands back on the tapestry. "Thank you," Rick said. He looked at Abi. "Help me lift him up." Together, they hauled the tapestry onto the balcony, along with the very frightened vizier. The man kissed the ground and then stood up. Rick watched him, wary.
"It would seem the historians have some scruples," the vizier said. "I, on the other hand, do not."
He lunged for the ring, still in Abi's hands, and the two of them fought over it along the narrow balcony. Rick panicked. Damaging the square was one thing, but they could not break the ring. He jumped into the tug-of-war and worked on loosening the vizier's hands. The man wrenched and pulled, and Rick pried the vizier's fingers away one at a time until the last came free. When that happened, the vizier stumbled backward, and this time there wasn't a tapestry to hold on to. Rick watched, helpless, as the man fell wide-eyed over the ledge. Screams and roaring followed, but Rick tried not to listen, and he definitely didn't want to look. He and Abi left the balcony and descended the staircase. Neither of them spoke as they made their way back through the palace toward the House of Wisdom. He had completed his part of the mission and gotten the infinity ring back. He only hoped Sera and Dak were okay. The break now rested on them.